Hi, I'm Carol Vance. I'm the CEO and founder of Alinea Engage, and I'm happy to be here today with Dr. Lynn Steffes to talk about some of the payment problems or challenges that physical therapists face. Lynn, you deal a lot with healthcare insurers and third-party payers. What are you seeing out there these days?
Well, I'm seeing a lot of challenges. Probably one of the hardest things is that we do such good work, we deliver such good value, and we're so challenged to be paid correctly for it. So I thought maybe we'd spend a little bit of time just talking about signing third-party payer contracts. So new practices that are opening have to make a decision. Are they going to be cash-based and just focus on the population that can afford therapy? Or are they going to contract with insurance companies to actually increase access to services? Contracting is something complicated that we don't get a lot of background or training in our training. And so most of the time when new practices open, they're just looking for what I call cheeks in the seats, which means they need patients.
Right.
So they're very willing to sign insurance contracts. And they're like, oh, I just want to be on the panel. I want to be in network. And so they actually inquire with insurance companies about contracting, and they have no idea how complex and complicated contracting is.
So they're not getting any preferred position.
No.
Or even asking for it.
No, and often they come in with a lack of understanding of what the contracting process is. They're so eager to get on panel that they're signing contracts without taking a careful look at the contract. And that's a really lengthy explanation, but I kind of want to just focus on a couple things about contracting. And the first thing I want to focus on is you have to understand your cost of doing service. So you have to understand, what is it going to cost to deliver services to a patient? Whether you're a new practice or an established practice, you're going to have to look at your overhead, you're going to have to look at your salary expenses, benefits expenses, what is it going to cost you for the personnel, marketing expenses, hopefully, all of that. What is it going to cost you to bring in an EMR, all of those things. And you're going to have to also add a profit on that. Too often we don't set pricing based on not only what our costs of doing service are, but on an expectation of profit.
So funneling and factoring all these costs into it. If you don't have a good contract, you could be underwater even if you're busy.
Yes, and there are times where I go into a practice and find that they're treating patients and they're really treating the patients at a loss. So their cost of doing service might be $65 a visit, and without profit calculated in, and they're taking a contract at $65 a visit. And so you cannot stay alive, you can't grow, you can't invest in your program. So one of the things I want to encourage people to do is when you're looking at contracts, do a simple calculation to try to figure out your cost of doing business. Simple calculation. Look at your profit and loss statement, look at the expense side, and divide it by the number of visits you do per year. What is your capacity to do visits? If you have a certain value, then you take that value and you say, I can't take contracts for less than that. Then you go into it with that mindset. I think too often practices they look at the bottom line, they go, oh, well, we're going to get paid and we'll be in network, therefore it's going to be
They're
great.
so eager to get going.
Yes. And I get that. And there are times where a new practice may go in and take a lesser contract just to fill the cheeks in the seats that I mentioned earlier. But over time, you have to continue your scrutiny on your contract practice.
What's the average duration of these contracts that new practices are signing to begin with and locking themselves in?
Well, often a contract is generally set up for 1 year, but then it's set with what are called evergreen provisions, which means that once the first year is over, the contract automatically renews unless there's notification. And one of the things I find that's really difficult is most practices are not looking at their contracts annually. They're not recalculating their cost of doing business. They're not really going back at the contract. And that should be something revisited at least annually. Speaking of which, one of the big pet peeves is the cost of doing business. So I'm going to ask you to think about this. Every year, the cost of your rent, the cost of your utilities, the cost of the health insurance you pay for you, yourself and your employees, the salaries you pay, the cost of, technology, everything continues to go up.
Right.
And yet I work with practices who never increase their fee schedule, who never increase what they charge. And I wanted to give you a little bit of insight that I think is kind of a wisdom pearl that I learned many years ago. So years ago, I was executive director of a network of clinics, so about 60 clinics, and I handled all of their contract negotiations with insurance companies. And I got to be friends with most of the contractors and the provider relations people. And over time, I would go in to renegotiate contracts. And I sat down with a gentleman that I got to know over the years who was managing a HMO PPO product.
Right.
And I said, our network has been with you for 3 years. We had this fee schedule. We've had an increase in the cost of doing business. We'd like to see an increase in our compensation. And he said to me, he looked at our data and then he turned around and he flipped the data toward me and he said, Interestingly enough, Lynn, out of all of your clinics, out of 60 clinics, 40% of them have never increased their fee schedule in the last 3 years. So how can I give them a better rate if they themselves haven't reflected that the cost of doing business has gone up? And I sat back and I said, so you want them to increase their fee schedule? And he said, well, if it's a reflection of the cost of doing business. And he said, let me also tell you an insider secret. And this is what I wanted to share today. He said, I am a negotiator on behalf of this network. Right now, say your providers charged me $100 a visit and I paid them $75 a visit. As a negotiator, that means I gave a 25% discount. Now you're coming to me and asking me to pay $80 a visit. So what's happening to me as a negotiator is I'm actually giving up ground. I'm giving up a 5% of my negotiation. That's a reflection on my performance as a negotiator. It's also a reflection on the HMO PPO discounting we offer the people who pay us. So he said, if on the other hand, you wanted a $5 an hour or a $5 a visit increase, and your people did a $5 a visit increase, I would stay kind of budget neutral. And he said, so you might want to think about educating your people about charging or having their fee schedule reflect the increase in their cost of doing business.
Got it.
And I feel like a lot of practices I work with will tell me I have not changed my fee schedule for 10 years. And then they'll say to me right after that, and I haven't gotten an increase in payment. Well, you have to adjust your fee schedule according to your cost of doing business in order to ask for an increase. So when it comes to contracting, there's so many complexities. One of the simplest things to focus on, your actual cost of doing business and a profit margin, and starting with that as a fee schedule and going into a negotiation with that number in mind, plus profit, of course, and a little room for negotiations. But second of all, over time, very specifically, looking at your cost of doing business annually and reflecting it in your fee schedule. Why would anybody give you a raise if you didn't show why and what your value change was? So
this just makes so much sense. So I can increase my revenue by slightly and logically increasing my fee schedule, but I'm also making it easier for the negotiator across the table to give me a better deal by doing that. So I'm winning in two ways.
Right. Now, I will say that some third-party payers you're not going to get an increase from. And certainly that is one of our biggest frustrations is we have a lot of payment pressure right now. But I always say we have to help ourselves. And so let's help ourselves by having some knowledge when it comes to our value and our negotiating, our base.
Thanks for that tip, Lynn.